There we go. We're live. Hello. So, today,
Hey,
Mr. Aaron Barber.
is it?
Dude, who are you? Where are you from? Where are you from? Where are you from?
Where am I from? Aaron Barber. I originally was born in Houston, Texas. Spent most of my childhood in Texas and adjacent Louisiana. And then mostly been living in Austin for the last, for about 10 to 12 years. So I would call that home, if that was the home. But then in the last 3 years, I've been in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
Nice.
Yeah.
And now you're back in, you've just come to New Zealand.
I just came to New Zealand the day before lockdown. Yeah.
Yeah, just
Like
23rd of March?
18th.
18th of March. Yeah. What was that? When you flew in, are you getting like the border? Well, let me just preface all this conversation first. So you and I are doing a tour called American Refugees, a comedy tour. Starts off in Auckland on the 18th of February for the Auckland Fringe Festival. Then we swing on back to Wellington for the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th.
Yes.
Something around those days.
Yeah.
For the Wellington Fringe. And then in March, we go to Nelson.
Yep.
And then
Blenheim, and then Christchurch, and then we Dunedin Fringe for 3 days. Yep. Then swing over to Queenstown and maybe Wanaka.
Looking good for
Looking
Wanaka,
good.
actually.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it was weird. The email that was on their website doesn't work anymore, but it just bounced. I didn't see that.
Got it.
So yeah, we're talking to the guy to get a venue sorted out, and this is just gonna be a business meeting at the end of the day.
Nice.
Anyway, but yes, so we're gonna be doing a comedy tour, and I wanted you to get I wanted to get you on the podcast, A, to get us some publicity, but B, just to kind of use it as a point in time to see who I did the tour with.
Yeah.
And for everyone to get to know you a bit better.
Okay.
All 62 people. It's growing though, man. I'm actually pretty chuffed. 62 subscribers.
That's good.
Yeah. I know it's not much. I get that. But I'm just like...
Well, I like what you said a while back. You said changing your goalposts or changing your metrics, right? Is it like, I need to have X amount of subscribers or engagement or whatever? And those are important metrics, of course. But they're hard drivers. If you're saying, I want 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, that's hard. That's really tough. Now, a lot of things have to fall into place for that to happen. But for you, I think you said, I want to have X amount of episodes done.
I just want to get to 50 videos.
Yeah, that's great.
That's my thing,
And, whether that subscriber count comes, if it explodes, if it doesn't, some of that's out of your control. But you can control the quality and input. And
totally.
if that's the goal, that's a goal. Yeah.
And I think the subscriber stuff's just a byproduct of making a good product. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think, that was one of the biggest things that I've kind of learned recently is just redefining what success looks like.
Yeah.
And I think so many people get caught up with that idea of success looks like X, Y, Z. And we also try and use it I think numerically as well, big time. Success looks like this amount of numbers in my bank account, this amount of possessions and stuff like that. But it's scientifically, it's been shown that motivation, if it's a bigger thing, it's not tangible, your motivation increases when it comes down to it, and then you're also not just you're more fulfilled.
Cool.
Essentially.
Welcome to Aaron Learns.
Aaron Learns. Yeah. Where I, the host, talk about myself. That could be funny. I just talk about myself to random people. Imagine that. You just get random people to come in and they don't say a word.
Yeah.
It's just all right, what's your name? All right, cool. Well, anyway, what's going on with my life? Shit.
So hosting. Okay, cool.
Yeah. All right. Now, you've got one of the more interesting American stories. I don't know. There's so many Americans in the world, and I think it's unusual, though, to see, in my mind, an American who travels, backpacks, lives overseas, and I feel like it's typically a European thing.
Totally.
Kiwis, English as well. Go to South America, do a gap year style thing.
Yeah.
You haven't necessarily done a traditional gap year or anything like that.
No.
But you're living in Southeast Asia, and what were you doing there?
So you're totally right. And I've had this
especially from Texas as well. Sorry to interrupt.
No, of course. And the thing is, it's not that complicated. Why don't Americans travel to Southeast Asia? Occasionally you'll see them out here, but it's pretty simple. If you are gainfully employed in the U.S., you essentially have 2 weeks of vacation, right? One of them is always swallowed up by a graduation, wedding, whatever, personal something. And then you have what you use for Christmas, basically. So you get 1 week maybe of like being able to travel, right? You can't go to Asia. You can't go to New Zealand in 5-6 days. It's just not enough time. I mean, you're going to lose 2 days in travel, getting everything sorted. So it's just not really worth it financially or just time wise. And so you don't see Americans over here for that reason. And it's just a different culture. In the UK and Australia, people take a year off of holiday. And I don't know if we always kind of thought, like, man, are these people just all rich? Like, can they just afford? Are they rich families? What is it? But it's not. It's an expectation. You save up money to do this. Whereas I think in America, a lot of times, if you were to save up that much money where you could just travel the world for a year, that would be seen as kind of a total waste of money. You should be using that on a vehicle or purchasing a house or a down payment on it's really about like a kind of a possession accumulation or something, based around like moving your life progressively forward. Like, you're just going to take a year off. Like, okay, you're not hungry enough for the American workplace, which is sad. It's really, it's not something I've ever really agreed with, but I have a really strong work ethic, but I don't really believe in that and just kind of living to work all the time. And so, our situation was I've always worked in outdoor sports. And so like sporting goods, camping gear, ski gear. My company, I was a representative for a number of companies, and I sold to an area, just typical sales stuff. But our agency got brought in-house by one of the brands. So pretty much everyone got laid off. But it was a perfect timing because we were just ready to get out of Austin and kind of out of the US, just try something different. And so this wasn't a backpacker thing. This wasn't like a eat, pray, love situation. We just like straight up, we liked Kuala Lumpur. We went there a couple of years before. We just sold all our shit and made the move. And so it was just like moving to Denver or Portland. It was on the other side of the world. Nice. And it's really easy to overcomplicate it, but it's just not. Like, people are people, places are places. Like, you got to call a guy to get your internet set up, and here's the plumber for this, and here's a lease. It might mean nothing, but here it is. Like, that's the thing. And so getting set up in another part of the world in 2020, well, in a modern day, not as complicated as people make it out to be.
I mean, I guess the big thing is money, right? Like, how are you getting money when you were overseas? So you're Southeast Asia, you're working as a contractor? Or
So what I did, one of the brands I worked with needed distribution in Southeast Asia. So I actually had met the rep who lived in Singapore years previous at a trade show. I hit him up, we grabbed lunch, and he says, you know what, if you want to sell the sports side of this, go ahead. And so, I did that. I still kind of do that. It's selling bike gear to like bike shops and just doing distribution.
This is in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, this is across
Is this
Asia.
all like door knocking kind of thing?
Yeah. So I traveled a ton, and that was cool about it. Is like, I'm doing the Southeast Asia travel thing.
Yeah, sure. But you're getting paid to do it.
I'm getting expensed. Yeah. And it was commission, so I still kind of took a lot of the hit on it, but it was all validated in a way, right? So I'd go meet with clients and hopefully something turned into something, and then go, check out like old quarter of Vietnam. Yeah. And it was rad. It's a really cool way to do that. And I've always thought like finding a way to follow your passions through your work is really awesome. I've always loved travel. So I've always loved having a sales job, selling cool shit to people that I generally like, and getting to travel through it has been pretty great.
I think, that's awesome. I think one of the cool things that's come out of COVID is like remote working and like realizing everyone can work from home. And I think a lot of people don't know how much you can expand that to. Like, you can literally, for example, within comedy, we know a few people who are working remotely who will fly up to Auckland, go stay in a hotel and work their job, while doing stand-up comedy and being able to travel on the road with it. Yeah. But you can extrapolate that even further and go overseas. I mean, not now, obviously, but you can. But, you can travel with a full-time New Zealand salary in countries that are otherwise incredibly dirt cheap.
Well, that was the other sweet part of it, right? So I would go to these places, but then I do stand-up at night. Yeah. And so I was able to do stand-up in like Taiwan, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore consistently, because I would go over there for work. A thing or two got sold. But yeah, I would just be able to jump on the mics, and it was awesome because one thing I love about comedy especially when you're traveling, you show up to a town you've never been to, you go to a mic, all your friends are there.
Yeah.
As long as you're just
You
not
have
a complete introvert weirdo, like, yeah, you're like, oh, we talk about our dicks on stage. People like it's, there's a commonality there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first thing that I think when I hear this is language barrier, stand-up comedy, Southeast Asia. It's all in English?
No. Yes and no. So it depends on the country. Whereas you have places that are, I would say, almost entirely expat focused. Thailand has been like that. Was started out that way very heavily. And it was basically, it's actually less than expats. It's English teachers doing jokes for other English teachers, essentially.
Right.
That's what you saw in Taipei. And that's what you saw a lot in Thailand.
And these are Thai people?
No, these are all typically Western expats. Yeah. Over the years, though, as the scene has developed, I'd say in the last 5 years, you're getting locals going up. Oftentimes they're doing it in English. But in places like Malaysia and Singapore, where the English comprehension is generally quite high for the population anyway, it's typically in English, but they'll actually have nights that are in the local language, in Bahasa or in Chinese, Mandarin, or even Cantonese. And so it just depends on the night you go. But I would say even more so, the style of humor is different based on the crowds, right? So expats,
not the culture.
Well, it depends on who's in that night, right?
Okay.
And how well it does, right? So like Malaysia, Singapore, they have no problems of doing very race-based comedy, right? Like, because it's 3 races on top of each other: Malaysia, Chinese, and Indian, and then everyone else. But it's a lot of like, Chinese guy be like, it's a lot of that kind of older
how does he
stuff.
be like, Aaron?
Yeah, exactly. It's very like Russell Peters. Like, they love Russell Peters. They love like fluffy Gabriel Iglesias, stuff like that, who are great comics, but they certainly kind of fall in a certain bucket, you know what I mean, of style.
Waka waka, yeah.
Right. Yeah, and so they love that, but it's really, to me, just a sign of like where comedy is. It's like I said, it's within the last 10 years. It's really kind of
still kind of immature,
totally
quite young.
Yeah. But there's some really cool guys that are doing some really innovative type of comedy that's kind of contemporary, like Western influence, but also very much its own thing, like clearly molded by Southeast Asia and like being a like globalized country dealing with it, because they love Marvel movies, so they could just talk at length about it. I know a guy who does a 10-minute bit just about how slow Black Panther talks. And it's hilarious. It's really good.
Should be a 15-minute bit.
Yeah, it really could be. Yeah. Get the shield.
So like, where, I guess, within Southeast Asia, my first guess would be Singapore is the best place to do comedy. Is that right?
No. One thing that I think is interesting, and there's some phenomenal Singapore comics. I'd say KL is probably running the pack.
KL, yeah. Kuala
Lumpur, Malaysia. They have 2 dedicated comedy clubs. They have a massive amount of open mics that are run by comics or comic adjacent people who are fantastic and just running mics, which those are the most unsung heroes in comedy. Like the guy who runs a mic or girl, whoever, but doesn't actually perform. They just do it. That's, because I'm
so necessary.
If I'm putting a show together, I'm putting myself on.
100%.
I'm hosting.
I'm putting myself on. I'm getting stage time. I'm the exact same, dude. Yeah. I think a lot of comics, when you're desperate for stage time, will fall in, and myself included, like you kind of fall into the trap of like, okay, I need more stage time. I guess I'll just produce more shows.
Yeah.
And there's so much more time involved on
it's a trap.
It's insane. Like the amount of admin to produce your own show for a 5-minute set for yourself. It's a 5 to 10 hours.
And you usually stink because you're not in a good headspace because you're like running time. Who's got door? Who's got this? Who's got that? You're trying to like not go broke doing it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a terrible idea, but it's a trap I've fallen into even 4 years later. It's like,
it's fun though. It is fun. You do get a little bit of an ego thing going too. Yeah. And it's fun to make money that way.
Well, that's the goal, right?
Really
like it's, that, I don't know. Everybody has their thing, right? And you talk about defining success. Like, do I want a Netflix special? Do I want to be on a writer on a show? Whatever. But it's like just breaking that first gap of like being paid to be funny it feels amazing. And it's a long high. I still like, planning our tour out. We've got a really detailed Excel sheet. We've got a tour manager who's essentially looking over everything, but it's still like, the idea that we could do this and come out, with a few dollars at the end of the day is pretty amazing. It's really cool.
The idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like it. It is now. Do you remember the first time you got paid for comedy?
I do.
Yeah. How good did you feel?
I felt awesome.
Yeah. I felt insane. I was just like, holy shit.
It was $8 in US, I think. Yeah. Because it was like 40 ringgit or something.
It's paid spot.
It is paid spot.
Yeah, man. I'm a pro.
I will say, with comedy being as new as it is in Asia, like they haven't really figured out where it belongs and where it certainly doesn't belong.
In what sense?
So I had a friend who there's like malls are huge in Asia,
sure.
like both literally and figuratively. Like that's what you do. It's so hot outside. Like you just go to the mall and they're massive. And so my friend, she like talked to one of the organizers. So they had this Easter weekend thing. So it's like a huge kind of atrium in the mall. And they're like, we want to do stand-up comedy. And we're like, in a mall on a Sunday, on Easter Sunday. That's what we're doing? Okay, so we got paid to come there. And I literally had to follow the Easter Bunny. So it's like a little stage with like 40 chairs and like 3 families and like Easter bunnies on stage throwing out eggs. And I have to go up there and I make a joke about him having fleas, and that bombed just right off the bad start, and then never really took off. So got paid, but yeah, like no one did well.
And never asked back.
And it was all like the most green open micers were the only ones who would do it because we didn't know any better.
Sure.
Yeah, but
sure.
It was pretty great.
How much you get paid? Was that that was that $8 gig?
It was around there, yeah.
It's real interesting trying to figure out how much you should get paid as a comic as well. Like I think there's the industry standard, $15 a minute, I think.
Yeah, so I think that's more of a New Zealand thing. So it's like 10 ringgit a minute in Malaysia, right? Which is about $2.50 US.
A minute.
But there is like a per minute thing, and featured versus headline versus it's a total shell game depending on who's running it, what the standard is. And that's the cool thing about comedy clubs, like dedicated comedy clubs, is they can have a standard. And a lot of times they set the standard for the community at large. So they're like, well, that's what, I don't know, Classic.
That's what the Classic does.
Is that what they do? Okay, yeah. And so like, if that's what they do, we're kind of expected to play by those same rules. And so that can really help.
Well, just to be clear, there's a board. There's a, comedy board, but I think the Classic is heavily involved in that. And there's rules that are set from there. But for the most part, it's very much a trend setter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because there's not like unions here, but there's a guild. And
there's a guild. I don't really know what you get from the guild.
Yeah.
I signed up.
Awards.
Yeah, pretty much. I think so. Do you have to be a guild member to be nominated?
I don't know, but you guys do a lot of awards for comedy.
Yeah, well, there's I think every collective has their own award things. There's Palmy. There's, I'm sure, Queenstown and
There's like
Christchurch.
9 comics in Palmerston.
Yeah, exactly.
They're all getting...
and they're all winning. They're all winning. It looked fun though, man. I saw the photo from that night. It looks like a fun night because I think Jerome was hosting.
I have. This is my own thing. It's probably gonna bite me in the ass later. But
rip on Palmerston right now.
No, I'm just comedy award shows seem insane to me. That seems like a thing purely by comedy nature of being a little bit subversive, we should be making fun of, because it is the most circle jerk idea of anything. Only certain industries can do it. And other people have ripped on this before, but Hollywood gives themselves awards and then they get themselves in troubles over the awards of not giving out the awards correctly enough. And then advertising gives out awards. I think real estate agents give themselves awards too.
100%.
Yeah. It's the most jerk off thing you can imagine. So it's being in comedy, it feels like the success is killing, getting headline spots, killing. That to me, that's better than any trophy I could get from other folks that I do or don't think is funny. It's just a weird idea to me that comedians would still kind of play part of that thing that seems really easy to lambast and make fun of.
It's a fair point. And I think as well, comedy is one of those things where it's so subjective.
Totally, yeah.
It's very hard to say well, I guess en masse, right? Whoever gets the most votes, that's kind of how the award comes out. Best joke. It's well, the most amount of people found that joke funny. But that's a weird category too, because I can't fucking remember any jokes off the top of my head. You know what I mean? I can think of the ones that are 2 months ago, as far back, and then that's about it.
Other people's or
other people's.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so you're voting for that and stuff. I don't know what it is. It's interesting. I think it's great for people to actually get an award. It does boost their confidence and stuff like that.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what I think about that, to be honest. I think I don't see any problem with it. I know it's easy to shit on it. I think it'd be funny awards, like Joe List.
Yeah.
He won the Gentleman's Gentleman Award.
Okay.
Gentleman's Gentlemanly Gentleman's Award, and he just like pooed in a girl's shoe, like to.
All right.
I'm sorry.
No,
I shouldn't have brought that up.
Well, I guess that's
I
the
knew
point,
it was
right?
going to flop when I was talking about it.
If we're going to do an award show, it should have some self-awareness to it. If we're going to be comics and do
totally, yeah.
I want somebody to get the best trophy should go for worst bomb, right? Like mix the Razzies kind
That's
of.
fair.
idea
Yeah,
to
switch
it.
it around. Yeah.
Let's have some self-awareness about it. Like when it's just purely an award show for the sake of.
So just make it a joke piss take thing.
It doesn't have to be the entire thing, but kind of a little bit of equal measure.
Yeah,
I would love to get a shit award for just
hardest bomb.
Yeah,
never ask back comics.
A roast is to me the equivalent of an award show. Like to get a roast, like where everyone comes together and writes jokes about how shitty you are, like that is the highest honor in comedy. So it's like that inverse relationship to me is I think that's what I get confused by because you guys don't really do roast shows here.
No.
I think Angel did
Auckland
one in
does. Yeah, there is one. And apparently it goes okay. I want to do one down here.
It's so fun.
I really want to do one. But I mean, even you were saying logistically, it's a bit difficult to do a roast show.
Well, it is. Yeah, it's more difficult than any other show you can put together, I think, because you're asking everyone to write entirely new material, and you're likely not paying them. You might have a cash prize at the end, but it's an expensive thing. You're going to have to get at least 8 comics. It depends how you do it, right? If you just do it if it's a tournament, that's where it gets tricky because you have brackets, right? So you have subdivisions, finals, all that. And so it can get really tricky to just logistically do. But when you do it right, it pays off so well. It's so fun. It's such a cool show. But also, are Kiwis really into that, right? It's an aggressive form of humor. The worst roast battles I've seen are when they go too soft. Like they don't respect the idea of like, I love this person. Like I'm his, children's godfather or something like that. But like, I'm going to make fun of your dead dad for 4 minutes and we're all going to just roll on it. And that's just like how it is. And you kind of have to go to that level with it. If it's not, it's just like, I made fun of, they did one in Malaysia early on. And it was ones like, like your mama's papadam is not so crisp.
I see what it means.
Really slight,
fake joke.
Like corny street jokes, yo mama jokes, stuff like that. It's when they get personal and detailed is when they go really, really
Did you just slam it back? Like, at least my mom's alive.
Oh, there was some amazing ones. This guy did. I had to pick a best joke. One of the guys, Nicholas Lim, is one of my favorite. Like we kind of started at the same time. His father died in a car accident where he went off the road, ran into a post. And died on impact, I think. Nice. This guy, Lancelot Tessera, really great comic as well. He did a roast against him. He's like, Nicholas's father died in this way, but that didn't stop him. He wanted to, prove himself. So he went to university. He studied really hard, and he got not just 1, but he got 2 degrees. He came home, and everyone's proud of him. 2 degrees. But that's not enough for Nicholas. He's going to go back to school. He's going to get 44 degrees because that's the angle that his dad hit the post and went out.
Holy shit.
It was such a long setup. We're like, where is this going? And then it murdered. It was so good.
Oh, that's so good.
But I will say Nick got back at him because Lancelot has another tragic story because his mom left when he was a child. Right. And Lance used to have this really shit joke when he started. He's like, oh, my name is Lancelot because my mom liked the name Lance a lot. And he's like, oh, he tells this shitty joke. But he doesn't tell everyone that the reason his mom left is because she likes dick a lot. But they're friends, and they're really good friends, and you can only do those kinds of jokes if you have respect for someone.
Well, that's the thing is it's like you need to get 8 comics who are into it, and there's not a solid group of 8 comics that are all really close enough to roast each other. I think
totally.
And I think as well, like in my mind, when I see lots of comics, there's so much, anxiousness, anxiety, nervousness, trying to please, just so fragile a lot of the times.
Yeah.
I don't know if like a roast would do super well for some of these people. And I think, but to be fair, I just think like apply if you want to get in would just weed a lot of that out.
I totally think so. Yeah. I think you don't know until you put it out there. I mean, there's certainly like the Kiwi dynamic of like someone says something horrible to you. You're just like, Yeah, I suppose that's fair. That's my concern.
You're not wrong.
I'll work on that.
Thank you for that. Actually, that was really good.
But
yeah, that's that. I wonder if that's a Wellington thing more than, because I know Auckland does well with that stuff. I think within Wellington, it's way more liberal, and it just becomes just more of a bubble. And I don't think that stuff really lends itself. I don't know. Yeah, you're right. We just gotta try it. But when it comes to like a roast battle, I just don't know if it lends itself very well.
Yeah, and I think you can like find yourself becoming the roast battle guy, right?
Yeah,
like,
which I don't want to be.
Comedy. Yeah, I
yeah.
mean like Jeff Ross, like
Sure.
he has other stand up and he's very good.
Was it him? Was it when Jeff Ross got roasted, right? And that's what kind of brought to the attention, like him dating that younger girl, because there's the other comedians roasting him about it on stage.
Oh.
Because he's been known to like I mean, it's whatever, but like 18, 19-year-old girls, kind of thing. But apparently, when he was 38, he was dating like a 15 or 16.
Wait, are you thinking of Seinfeld?
No, because that's another one too. I know that's 1738, but he was 30s. I know there's photos of it.
Yeah,
maybe it was in his 20s or something like that. Of Jeff dating this girl.
How obnoxious is that?
It's so weird.
The idea, and I'm married, so here nor there, but like the idea of dating a girl that young, anyone that young,
I can't even have a conversation with them.
What am I going to talk to them about?
I know, and they're all just like, "Oh my god, did you finish your school today?" Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, like sorry, your home econ teacher is a
Where
jerk.
do you think that comes from? Like, I think it's like just feeling like shit when you're in high school. And then
have you ever dated? Like, what's the range that you've ever dated somebody? Have you ever dated someone much older or much younger?
4 years older or something like that.
Okay, yeah,
5 years older. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I think that's when you start.
But I've never really dated. I've only like dated like 2 people in my life.
Like long term. Like
define long term.
Like I'd say 6 months.
Okay, one person.
Oh wow. Okay,
yeah, it was. I think I was 23 and she was some Italian model or something like that. I don't know. Yeah, I think she's 27. So like a 4-year difference.
Okay.
But yeah,
it's just I don't know. I think it's I think when you're dating someone that young seems uninteresting because generally there's only so much life experience.
Yes.
But at the same time, it could be really easy because like they don't really have that much responsibility or things to do or their own personal baggage. Like it hasn't really developed yet. You're still helping develop that for them. All the trauma.
Just dumb, dude.
It's just a weird and look, I mean, people are people, right? There's wild spectrums of people, but overall that seems obnoxious. No thanks.
Well, for there to be a pattern of behaviors.
Yeah, totally.
That's where it's kind of like, here's it is. Jessica Radke, a feature published by Vulture on Wednesday alleges that Ross began a relationship with a woman named Jessica Radke in 1999 when she was 15.
By Vulture on Wednesday?
Vulture.
Oh, Vulture, yeah.
Vulture, yeah. When he was 33.
Radke.
Naughty. So you did a movie.
I did.
So you filmed a movie in Southeast Asia when you were there.
I filmed the movie. Yeah. So, kind of interesting.
That's kind of a cool story. Can you
it is. Yeah, for sure. So I got to do in Asia. I got to do a lot of commercial work. So I did a lot of commercials, things like that. A lot of white tourists, things like that. But I also got to be in a couple of feature films, which was super fun. But the most interesting thing to me came kind of the middle ground of like doing acting, production, and then also doing comedy. So there's a group out of, I think they're kind of based out of Boston, kind of based out of Delhi, India. They're called Mythos Labs. And their whole goal is to basically go to regions that have particular issues, like social change dynamic issues, right? Women's rights, kind of combating extremist ideologies, kind of gender pay, all kinds of things. They cover all kinds of issues. But what they do is they essentially shoot PSAs, but they're not corny. They're not government funded or organized as much. And not that there aren't good ones, of course, but what he does is he finds local talented comics. He tries to find the best comics of the scene who really speak well to that voice of the culture, of the tone, and they really understand like comedy in that region. And then he tasks them to create a project based off a particular issue they're trying to solve. So we went in on this project and we wrote a script for it. It was first draft was written by a guy named Rizman Radzlan, and he's a young comic out of Kuala Lumpur. Absolutely awesome, cool dude. Has an American accent. Grew up in Bahrain. Chinese Muslim, like he's got a whole story. It's great. Classic, like third culture kid. Him, myself, and another very funny experienced comic called Prakash Daniels. We wrote and produced this film called Pak Wick. And the idea behind it is it's a parody of John Wick, but it's fighting the idea of extremist ideology that's infiltrating Malaysia and Indonesia. So we got to do a ton of research on it. But what we found out essentially is that ISIS and other extremist groups are amazing at the advancements they've made in communicating their messages and ideology to young people is just beyond what anyone could have thought it would have ever been. They have like a weekly magazine. They have like video game, like they take video game art and repurpose it.
You want to shout the magazine out real quick?
It's called Inspire Magazine. No, I actually had to get special access to be able to view all this stuff.
Right.
And so there's all the horrible beheadings and stuff like that.
In the magazines.
Well, no, you see everything. So it's basically, they try to scrub all this stuff from the internet, right? Mm-hmm. But people need it for research and for investigations and stuff like that. And so all of this content that gets produced, there's repositories for it, but you have to get access from a guy who works as a liaison with the State Department. Mm-hmm. So you basically get kind of a light security clearance to access to this site. So I'm on every list right now. But yeah, so it's like you can watch all the beheading videos if you're into that. But you can also see like they have a news program with like it's like ISIS doing the weather essentially.
Really,
it is crazy, and it's all typically just insane propaganda of like how they're. But what I really learned is that they have, for all the horrible things that ISIS is doing, like you have to understand what drives that. Like there's this ideology of like, oh, it's black and white. They're just evil. Like that's stupid. Like people are complex individuals, right? Organizations are made of people. And so you have to understand where these grievances have come from, right? You've got multi-generations of people who don't have a good idea of the US, right? From talking about U.S.-backed coups in the Middle East to Arab Spring and things not going your way to drone strikes that took out your family. So now you basically have a vendetta. There's a lot. So everyone has their own ideologies and reasons for doing what they do. But the point is, ISIS is not good. Like, of course, I think no one would disagree with that. But they're going through WhatsApp, they're going through Facebook, they're going through YouTube, and they're pushing all of this content to young kids in places like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines. So what we wanted to do a cool video that kids would like to watch. Like we're talking teenagers, and it would be funny. And so we got some of the best Malay comics. It's actually in Bahasa Melayu, the local language. And it's a total John Wick thing. But instead of like killing and shooting and stuff like that, it's basically an old Muslim man. And he has to take on these like kind of like motorcycle gang rempits who are stealing donation boxes from the mosques because they're doing it to like try to join ISIS. And it's really fun. It's a great script. It turned out really well. Everyone just turned in awesome performances, and it landed that balance of like kind of serious but also funny. Like I've always loved Hot Fuzz. And Hot Fuzz is good because it's a parody, but they take the action seriously. Like, they really love those films. John Wick is a huge hit in Malaysia. And so we wanted to have cool action scenes in it. So I actually got a friend I was in an action movie with. He came and did all of our stunt choreography. So I see all these comics. I've only ever seen them on stage, like being silly and funny. And they're having to learn all these just like martial arts moves with this total Brazilian like professional. And it was awesome. And they did a great job. It was really, really cool.
And so the movie was designed to make fun of?
Yeah. So it's basically the idea, there's a lesson learned, right? So all these kids are into it. And so instead of beating up what they call mad rumpets, it's like the gang, he like disarms them and then whispers like Quran verses into his ear that are basically like contradictory to what they've been taught to believe. Right. So he's basically teaching them through kind of scripture, essentially.
What's it called again?
It's called Pak Wick, which means Uncle Wick.
Uncle Wick. Pak Wick. Measures on effectivity, like how?
It's tough, right? So the numbers aren't there on YouTube, but what they do is what is behind the scenes. So, YouTube is, if you've seen Social Dilemma, I think you have, right? You've learned a lot of how the algorithms have run amok. They've kind of gotten a little bit out of their control. And there's definitely efforts now by YouTube and a lot to try to get that under control. Because the problem is you watch one extremist video, there's another one, there's another one, right?
Because it knows what you want.
You like that, so you must like this. And so what they're doing is they're basically injecting these videos into those playlists.
Interesting.
And so
that'll come up.
Yeah, it's called a redirect, essentially. And so the idea is that you redirect them. just imagine if someone was looking up like best ways to kill yourself, right? Like a suicide thing, you would hit them with a redirect video that says, oh, you could get help. There's actually hope, whatever. Like, so you're just hitting them with content that's not like so easy to brush off because it makes sense in context. But it helps hopefully, get someone out. And what's really cool is from Mythos, the actual organization, they found people who defected from ISIS or other smaller extremist groups, and they found them in the desert essentially. And the only thing they had in their backpacks was like some water, some very basic supplies, and then flash drives that had some of the videos that they had created.
So what are Mythos creating then? So I know they created the movie, but
yeah, so they do this in
stuff
do similar stuff all over the world, especially in developing nations.
So it sounds like those pamphlet drops that they do in in Africa.
It's a modern day version of that. That's exactly right. Yeah, but the idea is like not just American driven propaganda because this was a collaboration. This film was produced it had some funding from the U.S. State Department, but most of it came from the Southeast Asia Counterterrorism Council. And so it was very much like everyone had a say in it, but like no one was like, the State Department wasn't like, you have to do it like this. We had total creative control over it. If we had gone a really wild direction, I'm sure they would have asked to rein it in, but no, we didn't get told to do it any certain way.
I think that's one of those things that people don't actually know too much about, like how prevalent ISIS is in Southeast Asia. Like,
there's parts of the Philippines that are absolutely
I was going to say, there's
yeah.
like a whole city right now that's completely taken over by ISIS, and there's fighting in the streets.
It's reduced significantly in the last few years, but yeah, there was at its height, there were definitely cities that were completely under ISIS control, and they had governments in place. They had essentially a mayor and civic services, and in some places it's almost, they look like Robin Hood. They were giving money to people, and it's again, it's all perspective, right? Totally. From some little town that's been under kind of siege, and then they come in and actually take care of things, and they kind of align with
some money in. The government's been corrupt, doesn't give you anything. It's similar in like Mexico,
It's an issue. It's so hard to have a really diehard position on it, right? Because it is complex issues, and you have to look at things, and that's why having smart people in the State Department is important. I've always thought, if you go to any American expat Facebook group anywhere, one of the things they're always going to bitch about, especially come April, is taxes. I don't live in the US. I shouldn't have to pay taxes. This is bullshit. To me, if I have to pay the basic level of taxes that I do, which you get a huge exemption for being outside, if I still have to pay taxes as an American, to know that if something goes down, the State Department's going to show up, give me shelter, get me on a flight, get me the fuck out at any given time, if that's the insurance I pay for paying taxes to have the State Department at my disposal, done, no problem.
Yeah, but you shouldn't have to do that because New Zealand will do that for you anyway as well, but not charge you taxes.
Yeah, fair enough.
Do you know what I mean?
That's a hugely different perspective growing up in that. But to me, to say being an American, if the standard is you're paying,
you're right. If that's the standard, right? I just think it's a shitty standard.
Yeah,
do you know
fair
what
enough.
I mean? Like,
that's cool.
I think any other country, France, the UK. They'll sort you out, because you're a citizen, and they're not.
It's less pay to play.
I feel like that money grab thing is less about that.
Oh yeah, no, totally.
And here's an interesting thing: like, what politician's going to campaign for people overseas not to pay taxes?
Right,
right. No way. No. That's a dead end. And like, how many of these people are actually voting? It's harder for us to vote in U.S. elections than it is.
Oh, totally.
And there, so we're not going to vote for a politician.
Depending on your states, especially. Yeah,
100%. Yeah. It took me in Georgia. I might just be dumb, but it took me ages to figure that whole process out. Like, it was a month-long process.
Yeah.
To get I had to apply for the ballot, got on the ballot,
right,
and then I had to get the papers sent to me, and then I had to resend them out. It's all just so dumb.
At least now, and they may have had this, but I think given this election, you just wanted to make sure, but you actually were able to see that your vote was counted.
Yeah. I couldn't tell. Yeah, I have no idea.
Texas, they had that this year, which was really nice.
I just fingers crossed. I honestly, like, in my mind, like, I did everything I could.
Have you voted for the runoff yet?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I did. Yeah. Ossoff versus Purdue, is that
Purdue,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like two pharmaceuticals.
It really does.
Yeah,
that's Which one would you rather take? Ossoff. I'd take Ossoff.
He's the
He's
insider
right?
trading one.
I don't care. They're all shit.
I think that's a tricky thing to do, though. And I hear that a lot because I think that is the malaise of it, right? It's like, oh, they're all terrible. And generally could be fairly true.
I'm not saying they're all terrible.
But I think it's a really,
system.
I'm never public about that kind of thing. I feel that way too.
Mm-hmm.
And like, to me, like, I'm pretty hard left, right? I'm reasonable, but it's one of these things like Biden is a Republican or he's a conservative in any other modern country, right? And so like the idea of him like being the great savior of like liberal, ideology is insane to me.
Yeah.
I mean, Judith Collins, the New Zealand conservative, I mean, she by far would be a far leftist in the U.S. in terms of like political ideology.
Yeah.
She believes in climate change, wants to stop it. She believes in healthcare for all. That's, and she has a lot of other stuff that does ring more true to a right-wing ideology. But no, we're so far from center in the U.S. It's hard to even compare.
Well, there's articles written about how like the left embraced Biden, and like he doesn't really embody everything that they're after.
Did they embrace Biden or did they reject Trump?
That's very true.
Yeah.
They rejected Trump.
Yeah.
And that's what I think happened. They should have gone with Bernie, but
It's a really weird, I'm a pro Bernie guy, but like I actually ended up on radio in NZ.
Yes, you were on there, right?
Yeah. I mean, they talked to me for 10 minutes, but the only clip they used was that I complained that Biden was old. And I'm not like a hard ageist. I just think like, come on, you're almost 80 years old.
Did you get any blowback from that?
No one cares. Like, she's like, Aaron from Texas. Not that chuffed. Like, he's just so old.
And that's it.
But it's like, I don't want to be a hypocrite, right? Because Bernie is the same age, if not a year older, right?
Yeah, sure.
There's no doubt that Bernie seems a little snappier. But here nor there, like, I'm sorry, Bernie, you've done a great thing for, country and your service. And Biden has as well, sure. But like, come on, print this stuff out, hand it down. There's somebody who's, 45, 50 years old, got a little bit more influence, a little more. I mean, why is Congress so old? That's the thing, right?
How insane is that when you think 78-year-old, and I know this probably comes across as very ageist, but most 78-year-olds, will have some kind of mental issue.
I feel like my brain is completely like.
What is Joe Biden's age? Is he 78?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's 78, isn't he? Yeah, 78. That's insane.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you're gonna 100% he has memory issues, regardless of who he is. You know what I mean? Like, any 78-year-old, I think, has cognitive issues.
I'm 36, and we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
And there is no doubt, like, I would be like a Trivia Pursuit, like, just absolute demon. I'm so good at it.
Yeah.
And now it's like, who's that guy? Who's that guy? I'm doing this, snapping all the time. Yeah. We've talked about, you had a good point about neuroplasticity, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want me to go for it?
Yeah, please. You had a point about it, about like certain things affect it, but also it just generally stops at a certain point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so when you're younger, and this is what I was talking to Nathan on the episode that came out last week, or 3 weeks ago. He was talking about basically how when you're younger, your brain is incredibly malleable, and it molds to the environment that's around it, essentially. But there is still elements of plasticity to it as well as you get older.
Yeah.
It's just less. It's less malleable. It takes more time, more effort. Like 1 year of development as a child could take 5 years as an adult. You just basic stuff. So like situations that cause me anxiety, for example, right? You would have to reconcile that for 5 years as an adult versus 1 year as like a child.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sense, of course.
And that might be, that's just what I took from the interview.
Cool.
Now, so I was going to say, we talked a tiny bit about this, but like your professional background involves so much traveling, and I guess how did that inform your passion within stand-up comedy? I go hand in hand. I guess you're quasi touring with your job as well as comedy, but do they mold pretty perfectly?
I'd say so. Yeah, especially if you create the environment right where work is during the day and stand-ups at night, and then you leave enough gap in between. Because one of the things I've always struggled with, it's never been like, oh, that crowd's not right, or oh, I forgot my jokes. It's never really, that's never been a problem so much for me. But to me, if I don't get in the headspace before I go on, that's what makes or break a show generally, right? Like I got to be in a good space, ready to do comedy, like feeling loose, feeling present, not feeling rehearsed, any of that kind of stuff. And so when it's set up right, it's amazing. If it's a situation where you're dealing with time zones, like a couple weeks ago, I had a phone call with a client in China, and I got off that call. It was very kind of heavy, talking about investment, about this and that, like very serious work shit. And then like 5 minutes later, went on stage to open a show.
You were telling me about that.
And the vibe was just not there. Like the jokes were there, the people laughed, but it was just like, I was just so clear that I was not really as present as I would like to be. And I've learned, if there's one big thing in comedy I've learned. It's really just taking the time to take care of myself and be in the space to do it. And so, yeah, I'm so thankful for that job and doing comedy at the same time, because if I had only done comedy in Malaysia, I would have one very tight, basically spectrum I would be working off of, right? Because these jokes work, those don't work. I had a Singapore set, I had a Taiwan set, I had, and then I had stuff that went across all of them, but I certainly tailored it based on what I know the crowd is about there. You know what I mean? You don't go to like the middle of nowhere, Texas, and just do all your like white patriarchy jokes. And you can, sure, have fun. Like,
it's not gonna fly.
You just, you got to cater a little bit.
What's the biggest difference you've seen with the Kiwi audience coming from Southeast Asia?
They're
comedy wise.
The audience, they're definitely like more sensitive, which is not a bad thing. Like I said, it being very young, like racial humor and what I would consider racist jokes are still kind of cool. Like not cool, but
here?
Acceptable in Asia.
Okay, yeah.
You can still do a lot of that. You cannot do that here. And they're a little bit tight with some of their laughs. Like you really got to work. And I've seen some killers on stage here, and like, really? Come on. Like, come on. Like feed them great stuff. And they're just like, yeah, they're very mellow in that. But my only concern, and this is always tricky to talk about, right? About like, oh, they're too woke. It's not a SJW. It's not a woke thing. But I do think there is an isolationist idea of what isn't acceptable. So if you hear someone talking about what it's like growing up in a place that isn't on the same spectrum of like acceptable thought, terms, behavior as you're not going to learn anything about them, right? I had somebody give me a real stink eye the other day because I said, oh yeah, partner. I'm getting used to saying partner because that's not something we would say in America generally, because we legalized gay marriage much later than you. So typically partner was always used as a LGBTQ couple. Like, oh, this is my partner, because you're not legally a wife, you're not legally a husband. And so that kind of became the standard term for that. So to flip more traditional, terms of marriage to that, it's a transition. It takes time. Same thing in Asia. No one would ever say that as partner. That's just not a thing. They're very much gendered. You would say husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, even in LGBT relationships. Like, and so to think like partner is the standard, only you could say something like that is, I don't know. It's kind of like only think of your own point of view. And so not understanding that joke just means that you don't really care about what it's like in the rest of the world, which is the least woke thing possible in my mind. Like you should be constantly like absorbing and opening, and you can interpret it. I don't like that you're saying that, or I don't really get it, or I don't understand your perspective. But to say like, oh, that's just not cool. You're racist. You're this, you're that. That's a different thing entirely.
Within Wellington, there, especially with comedy as well, there are topics that you're not allowed to talk about.
Yeah.
And which I disagree with. I think there's certain things you probably shouldn't say about those topics.
Yeah.
But I still think you should be allowed to talk about them.
Okay. So the first New Zealand joke I wrote, right? I haven't done it on stage because of this, right? And I think it's sometimes you're doing it when you're being very progressive. Like anything that's a movement that's pushing something forward, you're going to have missteps, and you're going to have things that just are funny, that are comedic, right? So the Air New Zealand video, have you seen it, right? No one's been on a flight.
So many of them. Yeah.
Well, there's like one really famous one where it's a little girl in a treehouse, and a takahe shows up, like the bird, and the Air New Zealand people show up, they turn the treehouse into a plane, and they fly the takahe to a nature reserve. Great. It's really cute. It's very, very well done. But the first thing they do is they get to the island, and one of the flight attendants has an iPad there for the takahe. They're calling Mr. T, and it's like, oh, welcome, to the reserve. Perhaps we should find you a mate. And he pulls out like basically like bird Tinder, and it's like, perhaps we find you a Mrs. Takahe or a Mr. Takahe, which like funny, get it, progressive, but you just spent 5 minutes previous talking about how there's only 300 of these things. And like, I want you to live your best life, but you need to take one for the team and make some eggs. Like, I'm sorry, man. Like, come on, dude. Save the species.
I think that's okay. I think that's a good joke.
But it's a lot of setup, but it's a lot of like, oh, that's, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's like when you start, it's just the topic.
Right, it's the topic, and it's and I think that comes from being a better comic.
I think totally.
You gotta get to that point, in a really good way, in a smart way that and you have to contextualize it, and where it's all about your intent. Like, I'm not making fun of LGBT in any way. It's just the idea of a species that's almost extinct, and then encouraging them
it's totally I totally you're right though. You're right.
Yeah.
I think and I think probably audiences can be kind of jaded when they're going to open mics because they see, for some reason, whenever comics, the first jokes they usually go for are ones about race.
Yeah.
Open micers, race, a lot of Jew jokes.
Oh, yeah.
A few Jew jokes, a lot of gay jokes and stuff like that, and they just butcher them.
Totally.
And it's fucking awful.
What is the Jewish population in New Zealand? Is there even a...
There's definitely... Okay. I think there's... Because there's a synagogue up the road down that way. Yeah, there's definitely... I don't know the actual numbers. I think
Malaysia, very low.
Very low?
Extraordinarily.
Yeah, they don't like Jewish people in Malaysia, do they?
I wouldn't say individual Malaysians
Israelis
don't.
Or Jewish?
Overall. Yeah, it's a pretty strong...
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because I know there's even in the States, there's a lot of Jewish people who... do not like what Israel represents.
Sure. Yeah. That's the politics side of it. I think it's a fundamental thing.
Yeah, are we going to get into this? I don't know.
I don't know if we really... I mean, I will say the sandwiches and the comedy have suffered because of it. They use more Jews. Yeah.
Somebody was saying, because I think it was Seinfeld was talking about this. He was saying comedy comes from suffering, and that's why there are so many great Jewish stand-ups, because Jews have gone through the most suffering out of pretty much any...
Fair enough.
Group of people. And when you think about it historically,
yeah,
Jewish people have probably had it the worst.
Not quite to that level, of course, but I would say the most interesting parallel I've seen in Asia is Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, right? Mm-hmm. Malaysia and Singapore were one nation. They were Malaya up until 1965, and they basically kicked Singapore out. There was concerns that Singapore was too powerful because it's majority Chinese, and then you had dominant Malaya. And they were concerned that they were going to be fighting for capitals and all that. So they basically expelled them out of the country. Mm-hmm. It was a very sad day in Singapore. The prime minister actually cried.
Want it, did they? Yeah.
No, they didn't want it at all. But regardless, flash forward 50 years, Singapore is an economic powerhouse. Their policies, everything that they did was just so progressive in terms of economic growth. I mean, they're considered one of the four dragons of Asia. And so, I mean, where it used to be manufacturing or they were a port city, I mean, now it's just absolutely 4X in economics and finance. It's one of the finance hubs of the world. And so you see that. So most people in Singapore are doing pretty well. Mm-hmm. It's a very modern city. It looks like the future, and it's incredibly safe. You can go out 3 a.m. any time of night. It's very strict. It's very controlled. There's cameras everywhere, but at the same time, it's very harmonious in that sense. Malaysia is not the complete opposite by any means, but it's very much more has some developing world kind of issues and modern stuff. And it's kind of a hodgepodge of that. Mm-hmm. That being said, comics typically, come from a background of some strife, right? We're talking, that's two guys earlier, don't have, are missing a parent, or they grew up poor, or they grew up and so there's a lot of comedy that comes from that, from having that experience. Singapore, typically when I watch comics, it's complaining about the voice on the tube or a Tinder or oh, I buy this cupcake at the house and it never comes with enough candles, or very benign, day-to-day observationals, but it's they're observations of privilege in a sense of they don't have to deal. None of these kids grew up super poor or struggling.
Do you need that to be a good comic?
You don't need it, but it certainly changes the dynamic, right? And I will say it's a lot more relatable and it's a lot funnier because it's a lot more of an extreme situation. And the more absurd something is, and especially if it's serious and you're making absurd, that's a much larger reaction. If it's just droll, oh yeah, the lady on the sub voice, she does sound like that. It's a droll observation. So you're not going to get so much mileage out of it. And that's the idea. The more absurd you go and the stronger your viewpoint on it is, it's a bigger risk, but the payoff is much better.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're right. I agree. Now, anything else you want to plug?
Just our tour, AmericanRefugees.co.nz.
Yes, we got a website.
NZ, I'm learning.
Say it one more time. American Refugees.
AmericanRefugees.co.nz.
Sweet. I will link that in the show notes below.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, that was sweet. And then we can find you on...
You can find me on all them internets. AaronBarber.us on Instagram, website, Facebook, all that stuff. Yeah.
Awesome, man.
Go watch Pockwik, please.
Pockwik.
P-A-K-W-I-K. I've got it linked in my YouTube channel, AaronBarber.us.
Shit, yeah. All right, cool, man. Thank you. Bye. Hey, if you enjoyed that, make sure you hit that subscribe button on the left-hand side. And to watch other episodes, click one of those squares on the right. If you only want to listen to this and don't have time to watch the full video, you can find this podcast wherever podcasts are listened to online. Thanks. Bye.